Welcome to Utah Stories. So on the program today, we have Salt Lake City District Attorney and Salt Lake County District Attorney and Salt Lake City Lead Prosecutor, Sim Gill. Thanks so much for coming on, Sim.
Thank you so much, Richard.
So my main question, I'm just going to start with my big question right out of the gate, is talking to homeless people, talking to business owners, and getting their take on the situation in Salt Lake City, is that there's a lot of homeless criminals that are on the loose, that aren't getting convicted, that aren't getting charged. A lot of mentally ill people who are wandering the streets. I think a lot of us witness that every day in Salt Lake City. What is the main reason that we are seeing so many people who are getting away seemingly with impunity, committing crime, committing sometimes really heinous acts in public?
Sure. So I think first and foremost is that I think we need to recognize that not all homeless people are criminal, right? Mm-hmm. I think we can agree on that. So I think we need to be careful how we use that term.
And I hear from homeless people there is an element within that community.
Sure, and they get victimized, right? Mm-hmm. And there's criminal activity that occurs there. And then within the homeless community that is engaging in criminal behavior, there are probably two categories that I would sort of say, as if we want to really kind of have a good conversation about that. One is there are people who engage in criminal behavior who are predatory and genuinely are engaging in criminal behavior. And then there are people who are engaging in criminal behavior who neither possess the capacity or the competency from a mental health perspective, right? And now, when that crime happens, or the alleged crime happens, I think we have to acknowledge for the community of our citizens, for our business folks, that's very real to them. And if you're the victim of that crime, that's very real. And I think you have to acknowledge that as well. The question then becomes is, what is our response and how do we solve this issue? I've been a public prosecutor for 28 years. And I've seen politicians talk about it in different capacities and come up with different sort of solutions, but they refuse to sort of address the underlying issue. There is a presence of acute mental illness here. There are often co-occurring diagnoses of substance abuse that occurs, because if you're mentally ill in a system that you can't get access to medication, you self-medicate with illicit medications, right? And then that creates a secondary issue of substance abuse addiction that occurs with that. So there's a physical health deficit that is occurring. And certainly I've certainly not known anybody who's mentally ill who wakes up in the morning and says, oh, let me see how many crimes I can go and commit today, right? It's often the result or the consequence of their mental illness that happens.
I agree with you that I mean, the mental illness is driving, and the addiction is also driving mental illness.
Yeah, and so then the next thing is, once they interact with the criminal justice system, most people don't realize that there are two tiers there. There is those offenses that are Class B misdemeanors. That means punishable by maximum of 6 months or below. Class C misdemeanor or an infraction. Those all go to the justice court in our system. And city prosecutors, those are low-level offenses. Anything that's a Class A or a felony goes into the district court. Now, one thing that we've been very good from a criminal justice response is that if you go to the district court, there are more programs and greater accountability, adult probation and parole, formal structures of probation and so forth. Those resources are greater in abundance and available under those prosecution modalities under district court. Then, but if you go down to the justice court model, those resources are not abundantly available within that model, okay? And also, it assumes that whoever we charge with this crime possesses both the competency and capacity to be held accountable. Mm-hmm. So if we agree that a large, and so those who have capacity and competency, no problem. I think you can hold them accountable, and you should hold them accountable, and we are holding them accountable because they respond to that jail. They respond to expectations of performance, or you do an order show cause and you bring them back in jail, you issue a warrant, you disrupt them. They don't want their life to be disrupted. But this other subgroup there is nothing you can do because it's almost, well, one, it's illegal for me, unconstitutional for me to prosecute and hold somebody who is incompetent, right? So under the adult system, you can have competency reviews and they take a long time, and because the jail might be a prison or something, you can hold them long enough, and even that's a overwhelmed system. Anybody who's in justice court, their offense is so small that you can't even hold them long enough to actually do a competency review, and best practices says that you shouldn't. Now that kind of lays the problem.
So
out.
Justice court says that you can't hold them long enough to see if they're competent?
Because let's say you have a potential of a maximum of 90-day jail that I can do should I be able to prosecute you. Mm-hmm. But if I have to hold you for 6 months or 9 months in jail in order to be able to, let's say, even if I could, mm-hmm. you've served more than what your maximum sentence would have been had mm-hmm. you been just convicted. Yeah. So in that sense, that becomes unfair and unjust.
What about involuntary commitment? Why isn't that
That's a
happening
great
more?
question. So now the competency part is under the criminal justice track. Mm-hmm. And I think when you and I first met, we talked about, here's my take. Our entire mental health system is absolutely abysmal and it's broken. We want to keep talking around it, and then you see these kind of manifestations. So civil commitment is a thing, right? We talk about civil commitment, that somebody who's a risk or a danger to themselves or others should be civilly committed. Mm-hmm. And when I say civil commitment, everyone in your audience is probably going to say, when we think about civil commitment, we think it's a place. If I civilly commit you, I'm committing you to a place where you can get that treatment. Well, you know what? In Utah, civil commitment is not a place. It's a status. Let me say that again. Civil commitment is not a place. It's a status.
There's no mental hospital that takes violent offenders.
There is a state hospital, and that has very limited number of beds, right? Now remember, the state hospital where you can send people receive from two tracks. They get the forensic beds for the criminal justice system, and they simultaneously also get your civil commitment beds. And depending on what year you're talking, there's maybe 300 beds or whatever. There's a limited number of beds is my point. And for a population of over 3 million people, if you think that we have only about 150 or 200 or 300 acutely mentally ill people for the purpose of civil commitment, first of all, we're faking ourselves. So there's not the resource that's available for civil commitment. Then the process is that you go through this civil commitment track. They're not going to send you to the state hospital. They're going to monitor you and try to get you connected with some services, and you're supposed to come back. And if you don't come back, if Joe, who's civilly committed, who's mentally ill, doesn't come back, you and I, as caring people, will say, hey, what's up with Joe? Where is he? Let's go find Joe, mm-hmm. right? These cases get closed out. And so our civil commitment process, while it's there in word, it's not there in either performance or deed. Yeah. So there's a breakdown that way. And then in the criminal justice system, you have people whose conduct may be criminally charged, especially under the justice court model and different low-level offenses, and you can't prosecute them. Because they're legally incompetent and non-restorable. They don't have the capacity.
So
right?
There's a huge gap right now in the system, is what you're telling me. So that if you are, I want to bring up one example.
Sure.
I sent this to your office so you're aware of it.
Yeah.
Anderson Jones.
Yeah.
I looked up this case because I happened to show up right on scene.
Right.
3 people were holding their bloody heads with bandages after this man struck these 3 homeless people in their heads with a hammer. I mean, one man was very old, and I'm sure they all had concussions. And I saw this guy on the side of the road. The police were investigating, and I've been hearing this from homeless people, that there's this element within the homeless community that just keep assaulting people. And Anderson Jones has this rap sheet goes back to 2012. We'll show it up on the screen and link to it in the video. But basically, he had first assaulted somebody in the old road home, sexually assaulted somebody. He physically assaulted an officer. He threw a piece of concrete at an officer's head. He'd rammed some people with a shopping cart, and this pattern kept going. And then he kept having his charges dismissed in lieu of getting treatment, and this kept happening as an ongoing pattern.
Yeah.
So if he just is not fit to stand trial for a felony conviction, you're just saying he's going to be walking the street.
What I'm
we
saying,
just need to watch
so
out
for example, with him, every prosecution has its unique set of circumstances, and there are sometimes witnesses that are available, not available. With him, what I can say, he was convicted. And for the first time, in all those different run-ins he had no felony convictions. And so for the first time, we did convict him with a felony.
Back when he did hit those people with a hammer.
Right.
He did.
And then other people who were sort of, so in that scenario, he threw the hammer, hit somebody with it. He hit another person with a leg with the hammer. So that was an aggravated assault. We did convict him of the felony of that aggravated assault. The other sort of assaultive behavior, we couldn't get the witnesses, but we did end up getting a conviction. So he got convicted of an aggravated assault, a couple of Class A failures to respond, fleeing from the officers, and he's been in the county jail for about a year now. Okay. And he's there, but you touch upon that it implicates a couple of things. So clearly, he has some capacity. You can be mentally ill and be legally competent, right? And those we can work through mental health court. We can work them through if they don't want to participate in mental health court. We can certainly convict them. We can try to get them into treatment, and we can hold them, punish them, or whatever. At the end of the day, if we don't address the underlying issue, that person is going to be released. My frustration comes from is that even within that community, there's that subset that is neither legally competent or possesses the capacity, and they're not restorable to competency. Okay. Now, when we talk about, so even if you commit a felony,
but how do you determine that? Whether or not they're restorable?
So what happens is if you're let's say in the district court model, and you are mentally ill, your defense attorney or the court or the prosecution can say this person is exhibiting behavior that clearly has the presence of a mental illness on there, and you can do a competency review. And it is, although it's a really elongated process in the district court model, which I wish was much more faster, but nonetheless, we can eventually get to it. And the psychiatrist will let us know whether, one, they're suffering from a mental illness, and two, whether that person can benefit from that treatment. And then the state of Utah condensed that to a 2-year period, so we can send that person to the state hospital now, right? And we can send that person to the state hospital. The state hospital can work with that person with their medications, and we keep the case open because we're going to prosecute them should that person be restored to competency. And we're talking about legal competency. And remember, legal competency is about your ability to know where you are. Do you know what a defense attorney does? Do you know what a prosecutor does?
Can I pause you for 1 second? Yeah. You send them to the state hospital that has 300 beds. Do you send them there only if they have beds?
So that's a great question. So many times people are waiting to get there because that's the game that you're playing.
So then,
so you're now on a clock.
Just not
now
there.
You're on also a clock because you've got to hold them for a limited amount of time. You can't hold them forever. Mm-hmm. So then you're trying to get them restored, if you will, and if they can be restored, or sometimes we get a report back saying this person is non-restorable. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so this person is mentally ill but non-restorable. Mm-hmm. And so I've always said, we have to figure out a gap. And I'm not saying for every crime, but maybe for violent crimes, for sex crimes, for even murders. We have people who are non-restorable. And one of the things that we've been fighting for the last 5 years with the legislature is these individuals who are now getting released, what is their treatment plan? They go, well, they're stabilized and the least restricted places to be in the community. Do we have continuity of care? Do we have supervision on this person? Or am I going to wait for the next victim to occur and start this cycle again? So these are the challenges that we have with mentally ill individuals in our criminal justice system. Now, if the person is restored, we have prosecuted murderers on that who've been restored. We've prosecuted rapists who have been restored through that medication and support. They're guilty, but they're mentally ill, but they're legally competent. So that is the sort of challenge that we have.
And is that challenge, does it have anything to do with JRI, Justice Reform Initiative, that it is so hard to get these people off the streets so that more downtown Salt Lake residents can feel safe walking to their buildings, walking the streets?
No.
What role?
The short answer is no, in this way. Not with this acutely mentally ill population we're talking about. The JRI didn't really do anything with them. Mm-hmm. And that's if you want to know my true frustration, my frustration is that look, I think you and I don't know if I shared this with you, but I'll share this with you this way. Let me set the problem this way. Over the last 28 years, I've developed a hypothesis, and my hypothesis is as follows. When public policy makers fail to address the issue of economic justice, political justice, social justice, public health, education, affordable housing, etc., those public policy deficits manifest themselves as crises in our community. And then our public policy makers look to our criminal justice system to be our crisis managers. Mm-hmm. And in the application of that crisis management, it disproportionately impacts communities of color and poverty. So we are asking the criminal justice system, we're asking the police and the prosecutors and the court to find out. And the light bulb that went off when I was a young prosecutor was, I just convicted somebody and now we're at sentencing. And I'm trying to figure out, where is this guy going to spend the night tonight? How is he going to be fed tonight? Where is he going to get his medication tonight? Where is he going to get the other physical health components of his taken care of? And where am I going to get him the skills that he needs so maybe he can be gainfully employed so he can take care of his family, which is in poverty, right? Mm-hmm. All of those are public policy deficits. That's how our criminal justice system in its natural state is broken, mm-hmm. right? So we're trying to, on the back end, solve that issue.
I definitely agree with you.
And so that is there's a mental health component. Now, the JRI, what Justice Reinvestment tried to do was that it said, when we have people who enter the criminal justice system, we can jail everybody, violent, nonviolent, whoever, every felony. And we were on the road to economic bankruptcy because we don't have enough jail beds, we don't have enough prison beds, and we don't have the continuity of funds to jail everybody. And what the data showed is that anybody who we jailed, once they were released from prison, they were 2/3 of them were back behind bars after 36 months. So we went from spending $6 to $7 billion in the mid-1970s. We spend now probably in excess of as a nation, probably $60 to $70 billion incarcerating people with no return on investment. So what JRI tried to say was, okay, let's focus on the most violent. Let's focus on those individuals who are a risk to our community. But criminalization of a physical addiction, drug addiction, you're going to get a better return on investment if you actually treat the person's addiction rather than jail, right? Because the recidivism rate on somebody who's a drug addict is 68 to 72%. Mm-hmm. But if you get them access to treatment, that drops to about 26, 23%. Okay, so there's a great savings for the community, and they're not a risk to the community in a violent sense, right? Mm-hmm. So that made sense. Mental health court, which I helped start 22 years ago, instead of revolving people to the criminal justice system who are mentally ill but legally competent, the recidivism rate is about 74%. And we said, hey,
74% come back?
74 is likely to reoffend.
Right?
Yeah. And so, and engage in that interacting with the criminal justice system. But if we wrap a medication around them, we can reduce it from 19 to 22%, right? Those that we can help. So the premise of justice reinvestment was, let's get people into treatment who are nonviolent. This is not, don't get me wrong. If you're a violent offender and a risk to the community, then we should marshal our resources, aggressively prosecute you, and I have no problem in incapacitating you. But you can't use the broad stroke of criminal justice enforcement with everybody and put everybody into the same thing.
I think everybody would agree with you on that, like being hard on possession charges and knowing that there's still people behind bars who basically offended 3 times under 3 strikes you're out for drug possession. That's ridiculous. Those people should all get out. But I think where I'm wondering if there's some some overlap and problem is when somebody is a mentally ill addict and they're wreaking havoc, and you're asking the question, can this person be capable to stand trial? It just seems like, well, the first interest should be public safety. If this person is a huge nuisance in the interest of public safety, why can't we somehow find a solution to get that person behind
absolutely
bars?
So again, let me finish that thought on the JRI part. Great ideas supported by science. That's what JRI is all about. But what we didn't do is fully fund it. That was the problem. So that's why the breakdown with that occurred. Now, back to your question about the person who's a risk to our community, mentally ill and not restorable, right? For 5 years, we've been going up on the Hill trying to change that to say when they're being released. And if you want to know what my biggest fear as a prosecutor is, somebody who is a rapist or a murderer who has reached maximum benefits at the state hospital, and they're going to be releasing them into the community. We've been saying that person needs to come back and before a judge. There should be a cause of action to come before the judge to look at under what conditions is this person stable, and what is the continuity of care, because the conversation I don't want to have is to have the next victim's family because this person has been allowed to come back into our system.
So again, it comes back to policy.
It comes back to policy.
Yeah.
And we have to increase that capacity. And we have been advocating for that for 5 years now up on Hill. And each year we make a little incremental gain towards it. But that is my absolute fear, is this population. We have to address that. So the mental illness and the criminal component sometimes get overlapped. Okay? So my thing is, those that possess capacity are in the criminal justice system, are a risk to our community, aggressively prosecute that case and incapacitate them because they're a genuine risk to our community if that's the only option I have. Others who suffer from other kind of maladies that we can help with treatment, who are nonviolent offenders, let's get them access to services because there's a better return on investment, but we have to continue to fund those programs.
It seems to me, everybody I talk to, it is the same answer. Those wraparound services are missing from the equation.
Yes.
More people need to get that drug treatment in an effective manner.
Right.
More people need that mental health treatment in an effective manner. That is the huge gap.
Sure.
And it just seems like you talk until you're blue in the face and you keep hearing about it, and the state legislature's not addressing that key facet to public housing as well. I wanted to talk, I think we're out of time, but I wanted to talk to you about the failure of public housing, and that's the same problem. Those people in those public housing units are not getting treatment for mental health or addiction. The neighborhoods are deteriorating where those facilities are located. And so unfortunately, until we are ready to step up and produce these facilities, I think this problem is probably only going to get worse.
Right. And so I think there is a genuine question. What do you do with that subset of a population, if we go back to our conversation about mentally ill, who continue to be a risk but are non-restorable? They're going to need a much more semi-secure, where we can protect their due process rights, so we want to protect everybody's rights, but where we have that intelligent conversation that there needs to be some step up from the state to be able to address that public safety concern on an ongoing basis. The next victim is not a proper conclusion in that, because I have to have that conversation and then I have to explain the system failure to them. And if you're a parent of a child or a victim, a loved one of a victim, that's cold comfort to you, and I completely get that part of it. But the challenge that I keep posing to everybody is, let's have the honest conversation. Let's not overinflate these issues. Let's keep the separate issues separate, and then understand what our policy commitment needs to be without compromising public safety. Okay? Look, in terms of, if it comes to prosecuting crime, go down right now at the state prison. Probably 2,700 people are from Salt Lake County doing hard time. So we know how to prosecute people and send them to prison. Okay? But and I completely get the reaction from our community, because if somebody is yelling at the moon and defecating on your front lawn and you are a family, I have to validate the fear. That's a genuine fear to you as a citizen, as a community member. And I can't say that, don't worry about that. At the same time, while that's an indictment of criminal behavior by this person, it may be the consequence of their mental illness, it's also an indictment of the failure by our public policymakers and all of us that we need to be doing something different.
Well, it's like you got to get so many people on the same page, because I agree with you. Culture trickles to politics, trickles to law enforcement, and if it's always law enforcement dealing with the crisis, you got the wrong scapegoat. You got to go back to culture. You got to go back to politics and policy.
And often, after the fact, we're reactionary.
Yeah,
we're not right. We are reacting after something has happened.
Yeah. And so how do you get everybody on the same page? Well, I don't know. You have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No. So look, I've sat through, I've been a public prosecutor for 28 years, and I've sat through at least 12 to 14 convenings of this same issue. And my frustration is everybody wrings their hands, everybody goes to a committee meeting, and they come back and we want to do something different, and then we do the same thing. And, I was part of the Rocky administration when Rocky was here as a city prosecutor. I've been part of Aaron Mendenhall's administration as a city prosecutor in my capacity as a city prosecutor through that interlocal agreement, right? I've been the elected district attorney now for 12 years. I'm in my fourth term. And all my life, I've advocated that we need to have an honest conversation about this, and everybody who has a role to play in it needs to own their piece of it. And we need to have a cohesive conversation, so we're describing the same thing and not talking past each other. And as I shared with you, I was one of the persons who said and took a delegation of people to go to the Miami to look at it. Not because we necessarily need to replicate it. We need to take the best elements of that. But
so that was your initiative to get all these policymakers, the mayor, the Salt Lake County mayor, and the staff to Miami Beach.
Yes,
and to look at what. So why was that the destination?
Because I wanted us to witness the same thing. So when we came back, we talked about the same thing and didn't talk past each other.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the failures that we've been doing for a long time. And we can say, what is the criminal justice role? What is the police role? What is the social services role? What is the mental health role?
Because they've figured it out?
They're doing a much better job. So, for example, here's an interesting data point. I looked at it a couple of years ago. That the number of people that we were coming in contact with law enforcement at these low-level sort of homeless contacts, their intersection, I think in a period we had almost 1,100 or 1,200 sort of contacts at that time, if I remember. In the same time period, they had like 120. Okay. Wow. Now they're much larger than we are.
So you're talking about the people who are filling that gap you mentioned,
who are having that contact with law enforcement as a crisis in the community
over and over
again, right? So they have a larger population, so their numbers should be higher. So they're clearly doing something better. And what they're doing is that while the criminal justice system is available, they're also diverting them using the criminal justice system in a meaningful way to put them into treatment, right? And then their funding. One of the things that Miami does is that it has, I think, 0.1% of their bars and restaurant tax that is clearly set aside for mental health and homeless issues. So they have a revenue stream that is there, that is being used for that purpose. We don't have it, but we're spending millions of dollars nonetheless still. So the idea was, my frustration over the last 28 years, that everybody gets together and then they talk past each other. Now what gives me hope is that I have certainly in leadership in Jenny Wilson, in Aaron Mendenhall, the state legislators who went with us there as well, members from the downtown business community who went there with us as well, representatives from the jail who went there with us as well, all these different stakeholders. There's a commitment to want to approach this and not do the same thing again. So that gives me guarded optimism, right? The other thing is that we need to look at tweaking our laws, right? They have they have laws there where family members can petition to have somebody be taken into custody if they're mentally ill, if they're a risk to themselves. And it's not just an assessment, but there's a commitment for treatment that's there.
And we don't have that.
We don't have the same. We will arrest somebody, or we will pink sheet or blue sheet somebody up to emergency care, but then they get released. So law enforcement is frustrated, the community is frustrated, but that follow-up that needs to be done is critical. The other reason I'm guardedly optimistic is the Huntsman Institute, is with the receiving center, is starting to recognize that we need to be able to triage these individuals, low-level offenders, not felons, not violent offenders. So let's be very clear about that. But those who we can impact or get triaged there, and let's put them into that treatment modality as a part of that, right?
Yeah.
And so I am guardedly optimistic, having witnessed this for 28 years.
Are all the people you took down there now much more on the same page about what needs to be done?
Everybody from Wayne Niederhauser to Aaron Mendenhall.
Is there a policy initiative, like a big plan that's in place that's moving forward now?
They are all meeting and convening and recognizing all the different things that they need to do. And for my part, as the city prosecutor, one of the things that I've done is that my frustration and shared with the community was this person gets arrested because they're causing this issue, and they may in fact be mentally ill and not possess capacity. The jail doesn't hold them because they're pretrial released out, and they're given a date to appear in court. Well, they're mentally ill. They're not going to show up. So then we issue a warrant for them. So they get arrested. They're given a date to appear in court, and they don't show up. So you see where this is going, right? And so one of the things I did with Judge Landau was I said, give me a fixed calendar. And the fixed calendar, and where this group, this subset, not all homeless people, again, I'm talking about this subset of the most acute that are there, they appear in front of you, and then we wrap those services around those individuals, and that then you make them come back on a weekly basis. And if they have issues and law enforcement arrests them and they're part of our calendar, they're held to be appearing next week, and we see them on a weekly basis. Not one you're done, but we're going to see them. If they don't show up to court, we issue a warrant, we bring them back, and we get them, make sure we're connected. And it is that kind of invested oversight is what is going to be needed with this subset of a population that nobody wants to deal with. And the goal here is not criminal prosecution because, one, they don't possess capacity or competency, but it is about managing them and having case supervision of them so they're not violating with the same frequency, causing those crisis moments that our community and downtown business community is interested in. When I speak to these individuals, what they tell me is this: look, we are very compassionate, kind people, but their frustration is, what are we doing? Is somebody committed to doing something different than what is there? Are they getting the help that they need?
Yeah. Our comments on Instagram are almost 90% negative, like toward the homeless, because they feel like nothing is being done. These people should be locked up, gone away. There's very little compassion left. And it seems like it could be a powder keg situation all over the country if it's not handled properly.
And I think we need to properly keep it in its context. Look, from 2017 to 2022, there was a 6% increase in homeless population nationally. Okay, and in Utah, there are 3,557 people who are homeless. Okay,
unsheltered homeless.
Right. And when you look at our surrounding state, when we look at Wyoming, so what that translates, 3,557 homeless, that translates to 10.7 per 10,000 people. Okay, all right. When we look at our surrounding states, Wyoming has 11.2 per 10,000. Arizona has 18.7 per 10,000. New Mexico has 12.1 per 1,000. Nevada has 24.2 per 1,000. And the closest one, maybe by 0.2% better than us, is Idaho. So even as Utah in the Intermountain West, while this is a problem that we need to address, don't get me wrong, we are not like our sister jurisdictions even around. They have a far worse problem. So while there is a concern about this, let's not conflate and say, well, because this is a Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County problem, right? This idea, crime is up, everything is going crazy, earth is, the sky is falling.
Yeah.
But here's the other data point. Not my data, and I'm not taking it from Salt Lake City. I'm taking it from the state, right? In the last 2 years, from 2021 to 2022, Salt Lake County saw a drop in every major category except one, We saw an increase in sexual assault, which is our state problem, not just Salt Lake County problem. But we saw its increase in that. But almost every other category of crime went down. So, for example, person crime was down, property crime was down, society crimes were down from 2021 to 2022. And when you look at a 2020 to 2022, a 2-year thing, they were down as well. But when we look at our neighbor counties, Utah County, crime was up in both those years. Tooele County, because of their growth, off the chart. Mm-hmm. Even a mixed crime increase in Davis County and Cache County and Weber County. Ours was the smallest increase, and we actually had decreases, than all the surrounding counties. So what is it that
This isn't CompStat. This is state data.
This is State Bureau of Investigation data, because I'm with you. Yeah. Because you can fudge that data. I understand what Aki is saying. Don't get me wrong.
But
okay?
The state data for Salt Lake County, what is that gathered from?
It's gathered from every law enforcement agency, not just
one.
And
the FBI collects that data.
So we have, this is, and this is
I understand you. Yeah. I mean, Nordstrom just closed their flagship in San Francisco due to law and violence and crime.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's law enforcement. It's a breakdown.
But let's make sure that let's not conflate. We're not San Francisco.
Yeah, we're not. And
we're not Portland.
I think the way I present Utah stories and Utah in general is we've always done things a little better.
Yeah, we have.
And it's this sort of difficult problem is coming much more into Utah. And so how do we best handle it? How do we solve the problem? We touched on it. I think you're getting all the stakeholders on the same page. You're working hard to get policy change, to fund more institutional help and wraparound services. I think that's great. But it's like, with these business owners that are on Main Street, that they're thinking Absolutely. They got to move in the short term. Do you see anything that could happen in the short term next year or so?
So again, look, I'm the county attorney. Mm-hmm. I get to play in a very narrow lane. And there are other policymakers and stakeholders who also need to make systemic investments, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's the legislature, whether it's the city mayor, it's the county mayor, or whatnot, right? And we all have a role to play in it. And I completely get the point that the downtown business folks are making. But what they're looking for is some meaningful response, not doing the same stuff over and over again, right? And that's what gives me hope. Right? And then the other part of it that is important, because then I get implicated into it, which is, crime is up, crime is up, crime is up. It is certainly individually up to that incident. But as the sky is falling, crime is up, and we are San Francisco and everything is running rampant, that is not the case. So I want us to have an honest conversation, because it's very easy to make the argument about crime is up, because then you'll focus for incarceration or prosecution, but then it also gives you the free pass to not do the investments in the things that you're talking about. Yeah. Affordable housing, access to medical care, access to other social services, and this subset of a population that gets neglected and has been neglected for the last 28 years that I've been a prosecutor, right? Yeah. So my thing is, I want to have an honest conversation, and I want to hold to account all the other policymakers and say, show up and do your part. I'll do my part, but I want us all on the same page to do our part on it, and I will not participate if we're going to simply do the same thing over and over again. Yeah. I'll do my part. I'll prosecute the hell out of everybody who's competent and who needs to be incarcerated. I'll do it. Yeah. But at the same time, I have limitations on what the law allows me to do with somebody who is mentally ill, incompetent, and non-restorable. Yeah. And we're not going to be able to prosecute our way out of it. But those who do possess capacity, we can always do better with that. And so I'm committed to that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I know you need to go. I know you've been on too long. So thank you so much, Sim.
Rich, thank you so much.
I really appreciate you as a leading the charge to change policy, to really affect change. I'll give a little summary after you go, because I think this is such an important issue. You're the only major player who's come on this program, willing to stand up to my tough questions. And I just got to say, I appreciate your courage in doing that. And I hope more people would come on this program, because our objective is to solve the problem, not to point fingers, not to place blame, but to figure out what everybody can all do together to fix this.
And I really appreciate what you're doing, Richard, and also the point that you're making. You know what? This is not about shame or blame. This is about solving a problem, and it's about having an honest conversation. And it's also about making sure that we don't knee-jerk react in the old traditional ways to make the same mistakes, right? We are a compassionate people. We want people to get help. And if you are mentally ill and you're in need of services, we should provide that. And at the same time, I truthfully believe that you can do both. You can hold both thoughts. You can help people without compromising on public safety. As long as we have the courage and willingness to speak and have an honest conversation about it, not a political conversation about it, and not about pointing fingers, not about placing blame. I am like you, and that's why I appreciate it. And that's why I agreed to come with you, because I know you just want to say, what is it that we need to do? Why can't we not get together? So I appreciate your attention to it. We've just touched the surface of this conversation, and I think this is an important conversation. So I applaud you for wanting to do this as well.
Yeah,
so
well, thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, I hope you can come back too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We will do a little wrap-up after this because I want to talk about another initiative we're doing with the documentary film, the voices of the homeless, basically their input into this problem, their voices, their insight, along with all the people who are experts who are making policy. So thanks again, Sim, for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, for hanging in there. I know that was getting stressful. So we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Their job is